Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're just waiting for more folks to file in. We'll get started in just a moment. I'll actually be playing a few sounds from parks in the meantime while we wait for folks to join. But in the meantime, please just get settled in. We kindly ask that you remain on mute until the designated Q&A sections that we'll have following our presentation from program directors. But in the meantime, feel free in the chat just to introduce yourself, say where you're dialing in from. We look forward to learning more about you. A little bit of sound here, courtesy of a number of the assessors that have worked on quiet parks in the past. So play this in the background. Okay, I think I'll let that play out a little bit while we get things started. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and hello from the past if you're joining us on this recorded version of this really anticipated webinar where we'll be going over and introducing the Quiet Parks International Assessment Criteria. This is a long-awaited resource that we're hoping can help shape the way that our assessors, volunteers, past, present, and future interact with and engage with and develop more of a sense of definition around the preservation and conservation of quiet parks around the world. We have a lot to go over in a short amount of time. I imagine that once we're done with this sort of summary, you'll have a number of questions as to how you can be involved. What are some of the technical requirements beyond what it is that we're sharing with you today? Who do you get in touch with when you have questions? All of that will be answered in due time. But a quick introduction. My name is Ethan Bordeaux. I am the Executive Director of Assessment Criteria, Standards, and Outreach for Quiet Parks International. I've been with the group for the better part of 4 years. And really excited. This has been a long time coming of developing and taking what I've learned from my past life, developing standards and guidelines for other institutions that look at the intersection of sound and noise and human health, the soundscapes and pleasing sounds and annoying sounds too as well. So just understanding the whole gamut of how we interact with our sonic environments. And I'll be talking a bit more about the assessment criteria later, but at this time, I'd love to introduce our Quiet Parks International Chair, Matt Mickelson, to share a bit more about who we are and what we're up to now. And yeah, Matt, I'll pass it over to you.
Perfect. Thanks, Ethan. And thanks everyone for joining. We have a few tiles on the screen, so I'll shake my hands wildly so everyone knows who I am. Yeah, I am. Oh, yeah. Keep those loons just bopping. No, we don't have to. I do love that recording, though. Yeah, my name is Matt Mickelson. I'm the chair of the board for Quiet Parks International. I'm also the director of the Wilderness Quiet Parks program. And I have been with Quiet Parks. Yeah, I was at the founders meeting in 2018, 2019. So have been very lucky to be with Quiet Parks kind of from the start here. And just really excited for this stage of our organization where we have people tuning in from all over the world to learn more about the work we've been doing and to kind of help protect quiet and recognize its importance. Maybe I'll just start with setting the stage of like why quiet's important. There's a lot of familiar names on this list that I see here in this meeting and on the registrations, but there's a lot of new names too. So I'll like really briefly go through why we exist as an organization, and that is to protect quiet in all of its forms. Quiet is, yes, a thing you can measure, but it's also a thing that you feel, and everyone at Quiet Parks really acknowledges the importance of holding both those things at the same time. We can feel quiet and we can measure quiet, and both things are important. And quiet takes a lot of different forms, and you can feel it in a lot of different ways. And quiet's important to protect now more than ever because the world is really full of noise, and more full of noise now than it ever has been. Ethan, can you pull up the slide of the air traffic map for me? Perfect. So this is just like two random screenshots I took a few weeks ago, one of live air traffic, one of live ship traffic. These are just a few of the reasons why quiet's hard to find. We have hundreds of thousands of flights overhead every day. We have hundreds of thousands of ships in our waterways every day. This is kind of the reality of living in a connected, commercialized world. So we need to work to protect quiet. Yeah, now more than ever, or it's going to be impossible to find, let alone difficult to find like it already is. We know that noise is bad for us. Noise pollution is bad for human health. Noise pollution is bad for our ecosystems. It's bad for children's education. It's bad in so many different ways that we've just seen time and time again. And the whole antidote to that, we believe, is quiet and being able to access quiet. There are some slides that we can share with you on, the effects of noise, as well as kind of the benefits of quiet. So, in a nutshell, that's why we're here. We care about quiet. I know all of you care about quiet, or you wouldn't be here. And it takes form in a lot of different ways throughout our lives. So, maybe briefly, I'll just go over the program areas we've so far developed at Quiet Parks International, and then we're going to dive into really the criteria revolving around those. Wilderness Quiet Parks is obviously for large pieces of publicly accessible land. We have an urban quiet parks program, a quiet trails program, a quiet stays program, which is kind of in development, as well as a quiet conservation areas program. We're going to go into what each of these mean with you all, and what the kind of criteria is that each of these awards have to meet. And another thing we've been doing that we probably won't talk much about on this call, but I think it'd be interesting to let you all know about, is doing a lot of consulting work for different state and national land management agencies on quiet, not just on noise, but on quiet and quiet preservation and quiet interpretation for their visitors. Anyway, I'm very excited. You're going to hear me talk a lot more, and I'll turn it back to Ethan to continue talking about this massive undertaking.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Just a couple points too, as we're looking at this slide about program areas. There may be a few programs that you might have been familiar with in earlier iterations of QPI, like marine parks, marine quiet parks, as well as quiet communities and neighborhoods. We haven't forgotten about those. The amount of resourcing and expertise needed to build out some of those programs and better understand them is something that we're hoping to develop in the near future. Having just come from some noise conferences recently here in the States, there seems to be a lot of talk about quiet communities, which is really interesting. It'd be great to just, especially if those of you on the call are interested in that topic, would love to pick your brains on that. As Matt mentioned too, the Quiet Stays program is under development. I've been spearheading that with my experience in hospitality acoustics alongside our former president, Vikram, who's on this call now. So that's a lot more detailed. It's more architectural acoustics focused and sound level meter based approach, which the stuff we're about to go into is a bit more holistic and in general than that. So that'll be the discussion of a future presentation. So we'll dive into an introduction to the assessment criteria. What this is not going to be is a word for word sort of review of the document itself. When that's available by the end of next week, or sorry, the end of this week, you will be able to review it line for line. You'll notice there's a lot of shared language between each of the programs to keep consistency with how we accept information. So that's the reasoning for why we're not sharing the 75 slides that comprise that document with you right now. But I will tell you that the general approach to how QPI assessment works follows this 6-step process. The nominate through award and certify elements have remained consistent since we've started, since even before my time and during the time when Matt had joined as a co-founder. Just finding ways to simplify and now streamline the process for nomination, how we internally choose to select and begin the process of reviewing these parks, developing relationships with land managers, stewards, really eager volunteers. We've had really tremendous luck with folks who just have a sound level meter or a handheld recorder and just want to take advantage of maybe like a new location or a new neighborhood or new part of the world where they're traveling to contribute to this larger message of conservation. The verification element is something that each of the program directors is going to share a bit about, as the 3 programs we'll discuss today, Wilderness, Urban, and Quiet Trails, have pretty distinct verification processes, though there is some shared elements between them. What we won't discuss are like the equipment that's required, or like the fact that you need to record wave audio recordings to support your findings. And then just how those notes about how you describe subjective quiet versus the physical and measurable quiet. Some of that is shared language, and I think it's just better to review when you see everything in line with the assessment criteria itself. The analysis process is something that also changes between programs, but generally it's the program director with potentially the help of internal volunteers reviewing the data to, especially if they have familiarity with like these types of locations, if there's transportation nearby? What are sort of sounds that we need to look out for when we listen back to these recordings? The award and certify process, we have some more formalities with how these awards are delivered, what we hope to develop with shared marketing around how we promote and spread the awareness, as that's a huge part of why QPI exists, is not just finding these places, but promoting and making sure that people know that they're accessible, but also fragile environments. And then a new element, which we can talk a bit about in sort of a paraphrase section in a second, is maintenance criteria. So this comes from my world in developing standards and certification programs for the International Well Building Institute, LEED. I actually see some familiar faces here who also work on standards and guidelines as well for acoustics. This maintenance process is really holding that relationship between QPI and the land managers to an accountability level where we can like track and understand, hopefully using some really fancy tools in the future to like look at trends of data, whether it's continuously monitored or regularly within a triennial period recorded to observe ecosystem health and Quiet Parks award status of spaces. So that, I believe, will be a section. We'll talk about that in a second. We'll talk about how that's going to be open to discussion too over time. Just don't mind me. I'm also admitting folks as we move along here as well as the host. So an important element that I want to stress here in the process is these two really important terms, which are the unanimous and unhesitant opinion that the park in question is quiet. That's really bringing in this subjective analysis component to whenever a park assessor or a QPI assessor is present on site. Anyone involved with QPI that's reviewing a park there physically has to come to this determination. And you may say, well, how do you define this? It's very much based on this unanimous and unhesitant and powerful feeling that, yes, we need to move forward with fulfilling the analysis and bringing this forward to QPI. It is worth the time and the effort of the volunteers involved. It's worth the time of the land managers and stewards. So there's a bit of an onus on that, the weight of that. Many of the directors on this call can tell you about examples where there was such a promising lead. There was travel to a place that seemed super promising, and then all of a sudden military activity just descended upon the park within moments of arrival. There's far too many examples of this. It's very important to note this. I mean, it's important for us as an organization to understand the limitations of seemingly qualifiable candidates. So we don't want to discourage folks with this lofty requirement. We think that the moment that you achieve this state is going to be such an impactful moment for you as an assessor that you're going to want to go back out and assess the next part that is going to have this like sense of unhesitant and unanimous decision of quiet. And quiet experience, we'll talk a bit more about in the glossary overview section, which we're in the process of developing still. You can imagine how easy it is to define quiet and to define things like sound and noise. It's not, but we're eager to find a way to define that in terms of quiet education efforts. So in terms of best practices, I won't spend too much time. There's a lot of text here, but all to say that we do have minimum expectations for how projects are communicated from end to end. Who's involved? Who are the people that you need to be in touch with when you have expenses? To what extent can QPI help either like facilitate or support and put you in touch with maybe funding sources for your project? There's safety concerns, of course. We need to make sure that QPI supports the people who we entrust with these site surveys, but understanding too that these are in some cases, especially with wilderness locations that have risks associated with them. Making sure that you as a volunteer track your time. This is something that's not new for us, but we're trying to develop new mechanisms for how volunteers can be, in some cases, even compensated if funding is available to them using time tracking systems. And then presenting the award. We want to make sure that all of our volunteers and people involved are included in that marketing and messaging moment when a park actually gets to that stage where they can celebrate and recognize their natural resource of quiet. And one last slide from me on sort of the overarching elements of the award process is, again, this maintenance component, which is super new. I just want to make sure that it's really clear that there's awardees in particular are subject to this review every 3 years. I'll jump ahead and say that that review process takes place after the 1st of November of every single year. We're hoping to like, what am I trying to say? We're hoping to look back at some previous projects to get them on board with this sort of review cycle so that we can continue to hold accountability even for those who've been under the QPI hood for a number of years. The awardees are the ones who are responsible for reporting the extent of compliance over the span of award. But as Matt mentioned, as QPI expands into a more consulting role, we're trying to find packages and methods that we can support stewards who, among quiet preservation, are handling a number of other elements, and especially here in the States, just understanding that there's conflict and obstacles that face land managers on a daily basis. So we're trying to come up with ways that are both cost effective, maybe perhaps even in some cases very cost light and efficient to support people during this process, with sort of an expectation and package for how they can submit this over time. And then of course, just the fine print or the caveats of failure to submitting and making sure that people are held accountable if for whatever reason they choose not to, or if major changes have taken place in a park that prohibit their award status over time, just knowing that there is an off-ramp or disqualification too if certain elements are not met. But we'll go over some more questions that you may have about the umbrella items here in our technical Q&A that'll follow the presentations from technical directors. But I'm going to pass it back to Matt now to dive into the Wilderness Quiet Park section.
I'll put on my Wilderness Quiet Parks hat and not my chair of the board hat. So before I was chair of the board, I was the director of Wilderness Quiet Parks for the organization. I didn't mention this earlier, but my background is as a field recordist and as a sound designer and as an acoustic ecologist. So I've spent my career researching places that offer these pure natural quiet experiences, lack of noise pollution, things like this. And that goes very much hand in hand with the work I do with Quiet Parks International. So I have been the assessor and the volunteer who has done a lot of the data collection on our current parks that are under evaluation or have currently been awarded. And so I'll talk a bit about what our approach is, what our approach has been, and then what our approach is kind of going forward. In terms of the kind of tier of program areas, Wilderness Quiet Parks is going to be the most stringent when it comes to noise pollution. We still adhere to the noise-free interval of a place as being one of the number one indicators of the presence of quiet in that place. So there is no decibel level requirement. There is no sort of frequency-based analysis that happens as a requirement, I should say. The noise-free interval is really what we're most concerned about when it comes to Wilderness Quiet Parks. Our testing periods we've set kind of as 3 hours a day for 3 days a week. An hour or two before sunrise to an hour or two after sunrise. This is all very flexible as well. It's really important to look at each wilderness area as its own individual experience that comes with its own challenges when it comes to collecting data. And while it would be amazing to have, 24 hours a day data for 3 months straight, given the time requirements and the financial requirements and the resources needed to make that happen, both on the front end and the back end, we've found that this kind of approach of 3 hours a day for 3 days in a given week gives us a good idea of, along with a lot of other information we look at, of how quiet an area can be, and gives us an idea of if an area has a 15-minute dependable noise-free interval. I get all the time from people when I tell them about the noise-free interval, just 15 minutes, they say, oh, I know tons of places that experience that noise-free interval. And I have followed my fair share of leads. And when you set up high sensitivity microphone systems, what we find is, as many of you know, sound travels in ways that are hard to predict and hard to contain. So there's very few places left on the planet that experience this 15-minute noise-free interval. We also kind of give good best practices on what kind of locations we want to choose for selecting data acquisition spots. So we shouldn't be recording data right next to a river or next to like a geothermal vent, or on top of a mountain that's going to be windy the whole time. We're trying to set ourselves up to have the largest acoustic horizon, collect the most data possible from the largest area possible in places that are strategic around the parks. So when people come to me looking to plan testing on different pieces of land for wilderness quiet parks, I really work closely with them to look at maps, look at user data, look at any information that we can pick up before we head into the field, to make sure we collect the most accurate data possible. I think what's also important to note is that this subjective experience that we keep talking about is also really important. Where, like Ethan said, you could have an hour and a half noise-free interval, and if all of a sudden we realize that it's a military operating area or there's distant kind of explosions from mining or something like this, that's an immediate disqualification of a park. Because what we don't want to do is call a place quiet, send people into quiet, and then have that kind of experience for them. So we've seen a lot of places, unfortunately, especially in the US, kind of be disqualified as a result of those things. And additionally, yeah, that kind of unwavering, unhesitant feeling that you get of, is this a quiet place, is also just as important. It's like, I've described it to people, and a lot of you probably know this feeling. It's like, if you know wine really well, you can talk about wine in a lot of different ways, using a lot of adjectives that don't mean anything to a lot of people. Our team and our assessors understand quiet in that way, and we can describe quiet and sense quiet in a way that can sometimes be hard to verbalize. So that's kind of the basics of wilderness quiet parks. When you review the full criteria, you'll see that there's a lot more information about equipment and best practices and things. So yeah, that's the wilderness quiet park criteria for now.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. Yeah, we have a couple images too from wilderness quiet locations if you wanted to.
Oh, I forgot. I wanted to just talk about two quick little case studies that are on opposite sides of the spectrum. The first being American Prairie Reserve in Montana, which hasn't been officially awarded a wilderness quiet park yet, but certainly will be as soon as we work out the details with them. American Prairie Reserve is a private reserve, essentially. It's not a federal or a state agency. They contacted us and we worked together to survey a lot of the land that they have in northeastern Montana for quiet, the presence of quiet and for noise. I share this example because not only is it a phenomenal place to listen and to be quiet, and the quiet there is abundant with really long noise-free intervals, is that because they were a private land manager, they have a lot more leeway to essentially offer either in-kind lodging, or we can work with them really closely on how they roll out this news to their visitors and to their partners and to local kind of stakeholders like the tribes in the area and visitors, things like this. On the other end of the spectrum, which if you go to the next slide, Ethan, is federally managed lands, which can sometimes be really difficult to I don't want to say difficult to work with, but they have a lot on their plate. There are federal land managers on this call right now who I'm really good friends with, and I feel confident telling you that the amount of work that they have to do is really intense. So they don't necessarily have a lot of extra time to coordinate with a nonprofit who's trying to do independent research in a park. Boundary Waters Wilderness Canoe Area was an area that we worked to research and awarded Wilderness Quiet Park with the help of nonprofit partners who work with the park. So Save the Boundary Waters, Friends of the Boundary Waters, there are all these kind of sister organizations that work to protect the park. And Boundary Waters is also under really specific threat right now from a lot of different things, but especially what's going on in the new administration. So it was really important to us to get this word out, to kind of raise awareness and help these nonprofits continue to protect this place. So two very opposite ends of the spectrum, one being a private reserve where we can go in and do anything we need, the other being a federal piece of land that we really want to work with federal land managers in the kind of rollout of these awards to make sure we're not adding work to their plate. So yeah, each place is different deserves its own approach, which is why I kind of work with everyone who wants to assess wilderness quiet parks to make sure we're doing the best we can.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. And thanks to those who've been adding questions into the chat. Please feel free to continue doing that. We'll address them in the Q&A after. Some good ones so far. I'm going to hand it over to Ulf now, who joins us from Portland.
Yes, hello. As Ethan said, I'm in Portland, Oregon, but my home is in Sweden. So up in the mountains, in the Swedish mountains. I'm not as Matt, a sound recordist. My background for coming into quiet is through public health. I worked with public health and had this epiphany that if you want a healthier population, you need to get them out in nature, and nature need to be quiet to get the inner stillness and the stress relief that you can get from being in nature. So I worked in this area from 2015, basically, and joined Quiet Parks in 2019, I think. So I've been along for quite a long time too. And the quiet in the urban areas are, of course, different from the wilderness area. Maybe you can jump to the next slide, Ethan. You could say that there's quite a difference in what we define as an urban park. You have the traditional park, like the park on the picture that's in the US here in Portland, where you have the closed-in park with all the roads around it. Or if you take the next slide, our very, very first urban quiet park was in Taiwan. And that's a nature reserve directly connected to the city. And of course, there's quite a enormous difference in how much quiet you can find in a nature reserve close to a city or in a small city park. We can jump to next slide. The criteria is here quite different from the wilderness, because we can use decibels as one measurement of quiet. There's a lot of studies around city noise. You can get noise maps from a lot of cities. And in Europe, we have quite a lot of definitions of quiet areas and cities, and a lot of EU criteria that must be fulfilled from cities. So we know quite a lot of what is the level we could expect to experience quiet. But as in wilderness quiet parks, it's the total experience that's very, very important. It's not, even if we use decibel as a measurement, that's just one part of it. You have to experience fully the quiet. It's also the case that you can't expect ever a park to be totally quiet. There's also always a big difference from the entrance to a park to those hidden places within the park that can offer this level of quiet. So we have an average decibel level we set on the park, and we also have values for air traffic passing by or noise disturbances. It couldn't be too often, then the park gets disqualified. The site should also be accessible. So that's one important part. Even if it's a nature reserve in connection to the city, it should be easily accessible. You could say that to assess these parks, I think we have the next picture. It's a bit the same as with the wilderness. You need a team, and you go in and experience the park at first. We have used quite a lot of different groups to do the assessments, everything from students in different cases to teams that we ourselves set up. You also need to repeat the visit to the park, because a park in an urban setting can be very different from different time of the year, different time of the week, as you all know. And also with wind direction can very heavily affect the experience of quiet in a park. So it's slightly different, and in one way it's much more accessible to evaluate the urban park. It's easier to get there when we have teams of people that are local. And that's also why we rely on our volunteers to do this work, that you have a local connection to the park. Do I have one more slide?
No, that's all, Ulf. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Anything else I need to add, Ethan?
No, unless there's any burning. I had a couple anecdotes as someone who's helped Ulf in as a New York City well, for the past 10 years living in New York City, I was helping Ulf find the quietest park in New York, and easier said than done, as you might imagine. It's a really complex analysis, and these are really complex noisy cities that we're dealing with. And we're still in the process. It's that accessibility question that often makes it difficult, especially for cities in the US, to satisfy these criteria. So you could have a perfect candidate. I'm not saying we do or we don't have a perfect candidate for this in New York, but the accessibility component makes things challenging occasionally. I'll also add too that, yeah, go for it. Oh,
I mean, one thing you could add, the experience of quiet in the city is often depending on the difference between walking on a noisy street and walking into a park. So even a park that's 55 decibels can be experienced on very quiet if you move from 85 in a noisy street. So it's kind of adding other things that we maybe in the future will more have in the discussion too. Because like Ethan is saying, New York is hard, and some people in Asia is also, some cities in Asia is also very, very hard to get anything close to those 45 decibels.
yeah. We're fortunate to have friends too at universities in Montreal and London who have spoken to us and talked about forthcoming soundscape research and assessment. There's a really great program and certification program coming out of University College of London, who I had the chance to meet with last week, and really interesting stuff. So definitely a starting point for urban quiet parks, but certainly watch this space, because I think this is going to be changing in a really big way pretty soon too. So thank you, Ulf. I'm going to pass it over now to Nick McMahon, who's going to be our last director speaking about programs today. So Nick, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. You can hear me all right?
Yes.
All right, great. Yeah, my name is Nick McMahon. I'm the director of Quiet Trails, and in some ways a little bit newer with the Quiet Park group. And I guess I got into quiet parks as sort of as a traveler, and it was really fitting for me to become the director of Quiet Trails. I was hiking around and traveling, and I met one of the founders, Gordon Hempton, down in at now a quiet park or quiet wilderness park in South America, near the Zabalo community. You can see some of that information through the website, and there's just the immensity of the rainforest in the Amazon, and learning about sound recording through that lens was really compelling to me. I ended up just hiking around and recording a lot of sounds in the wilderness as COVID became sort of this quieting time for the world. So it was really a kind of a special moment in my life. And as things started opening up, I went on a canoe trip down the Niobrara River in Nebraska, and I was working as a volunteer, and Gordon had taken me with him because it was a park that he was really interested in. So the influence continued, and the whole time we were on this trip going down this river, we were continually asking ourselves, what is quiet? How is this quiet different than maybe an experience in wilderness quiet? Because that was sort of the closest type of landscape. It was a wilderness, but there were highways nearby, and occasional aircraft, and occasionally we would camp along the river and we could hear some road noise. And so the quiet trails was really taking shape there. And assessment criteria, this was in 2020, 2021. Yeah, so it was still kind of in a developmental stage, and we started looking at the different ways that these programs could all align with each other, but also be differentiated. I also had this really wonderful pleasure of assessing Glacier National Park that same year. So I had these really cool, like, just like dynamic experiences of being in really quiet places that are wilderness-y, but also, traveling through a different type of path. And so Quiet Trails was born sort of out of that, and uh, mostly receiving outreach from or interest from other people around the world is how we found other quiet trails. The quiet trail most recently awarded was in Spain, and it's a biking trail or a bike packing trail, and that's been so different for me. I'm not necessarily a biker, but having had many conversations with the volunteers there and their time their time exploring and assessing that trail has been really enlightening as to the possibilities of what a quiet trail could be. Really special conversations also with Lila Fan out of Taiwan, who created, I think it was Quiet Park's first quiet trail. And she also was part of the team that created the urban quiet park in Taiwan. I think that the urban quiet park's near Taipei. I could be wrong on that. So check the map. There's a map with all of this stuff. I
No,
saw
you're
that was one
spot
of
on, Nick. It's right outside of Taipei.
okay, yeah, yeah, and so just kind of really getting a lot of insight from Lila and Gordon as I hiked around these beautiful places. Here's a picture of Emily, a volunteer. She and I got to hike in Haleakala, which is a mountain on Maui, and assess it for essentially a quiet park. Sometimes these do have some overlap, and I really like this concept of the trails kind of spreading the quiet through different places, going to the wilderness, but also having more intersection with cities and urban areas even. One of the really big challenges with assessing this kind of stuff that we've encountered, especially even on this location, is finding partners, nonprofits, organizations to work with. And that's an ongoing challenge. We'd like to be awarding these places of quiet to a person or a group or some sort of entity. And if we don't find it, sometimes we have assessed places that we're kind of just waiting on finding that outlet really. Even individual people have received awards for their quiet places, but yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on that. We can probably leave it at that for now, I think. Ethan, do you feel like there's anything else I should cover for quiet trails?
Yeah, well, I mean, we were, I think just showing the difference in verification between this and some of the other programs too, if you wanted to dive into that, but I think.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, really briefly, I kind of tried to base it loosely around bridging the gap between the wilderness areas and the urban parks. And obviously, these really kind of dramatic noise instances of fighter jets, gunfire, explosions, and things like that continue to be a disqualifier. But we're trying to also, find these places where if there is a highway not far away, at times of the day, it's really quiet. And as you're going down this path, there's these moments where the volunteers, the assessors can look at each other and say they're having a true experience of quiet and feel like they're having that meaningfully, throughout the time, even if there's at times some noise instances. And we're trying to like capture that really within the criteria, which has been a challenge, but I think we've got a pretty good hold on it for now. And yeah, a lot of the methodology is somewhat similar, just slightly different, like time frames. And as you're traveling down a trail where at like a wilderness quiet park, you might be at a campsite or kind of a little bit more stationary. A trail is really meant to be traveled on, whether it's a river, a bike path, a hiking trail, and open to other modes of transportation that are quiet, of course.
Yeah, some key differences here being since you're going from point A to point B, there's just that much more of an increase in the type of things you'll see, anthropogenic sound sources, perhaps, or other signs of civilization too. So that stuff can impact the capital Q quiet experience component too. So that's all stuff that the notes that accompany a quiet trails assessment are as, if not sometimes even more valuable than some of the other programs that we have assessments.
Yes. One of the really fascinating things about like the Quiet Trail in Spain that's recently been awarded is that the volunteers at times are traveling on their bikes through small towns and small communities that obviously would have some of their own noise, as we call it, but it also could be, you know, really enhancing of the experience of the Quiet Trail too. And that, yeah, again, it is very subjective on the experiential level.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Nick.
Yeah.
I lied earlier when I said we had our last program presenter, because we have our last designation to discuss, and we'll hand it back over to Matt, who's been our interim quiet conservation areas lead. This one's a bit different, so it's not quite the same level of award as you'll find with the other three programs, but I'll leave it to Matt to share the rest.
I'm the quiet garbage can. I just like taking all the quiet things that I can. Yeah, quiet conservation areas is, I would say, you know, where wilderness quiet parks is kind of the least amount of noise pollution allowable under really strict standards. Quiet conservation areas is kind of the other end of the spectrum, where places that don't meet the criteria of a wilderness quiet park or an urban quiet park or a quiet trail can still work to protect quiet. This award kind of came about as a result of seeing lots of places that unfortunately were never going to meet a wilderness quiet park criteria, but also weren't going to meet the urban quiet park criteria, and also weren't a trail. So we really don't want to gatekeep quiet. The goal of this organization is to bring it to as many people as possible, whether you live in the middle of nowhere or you live in the middle of a city. You deserve quiet, you deserve access to quiet, and if you want to protect quiet, we want to give you tools to do that. So quiet conservation areas is a relatively new program area that we started, where the requirements are it's very minimal, where any land manager can apply, and we do a little interview process and some research and kind of get a statement from them about why quiet's important and how they hope to protect quiet and what they're going to work to do to protect quiet. And that's kind of all you need. All you need to do is kind of be open to that that guidance. What we found a lot is that land managers want to protect quiet, and they don't have the resources to do it necessarily, or the expertise to do it. That's where Quiet Parks International has really, I think, been able to help protect quiet, is kind of backfill in there. And these are usually places that are beautiful and scenic and do have quiet. It just sometimes can take different forms. I'll talk about just one case study that's one of our most impactful awards we've ever given, which is in Anza Borrego Desert State Park. The community in Anza Borrego Desert, which is, for reference, just east of San Diego by about 2 hours. It's the largest state park in the California State Park system. Their nonprofit partner, the state park's nonprofit partner, reached out to us hoping to receive a Wilderness Quiet Parks award. They had funding to send us out to do data collection. When we collected the data, I just knew right away, I was on the team, and we just kind of were unanimous and unhesitant in our opinion that it wasn't going to qualify for a Wilderness Quiet Park. However, it's a beautiful place with lots of quiet. It just doesn't meet that 15-minute noise-free interval. So when I suggested the Quiet Conservation Area Award, they were kind of just as excited, because they wanted to work to protect quiet. They wanted to bring a quiet experience to their visitors, and recognize a really important resource that they've been stewarding, for a long time there. So along with the state park and the nonprofit partner, we actually developed a map based on our data collection about where you'd be likely to find quiet. Which is really cool, and kind of one of the first really specialized maps that we've been able to make with a real GIS team from the state park system. So that was really exciting. And we've continued this partnership with them now it's going on 4 years, where I do continued education through the state park system there with visitors. I give webinars, and then I also host a quiet research retreat every year, where we bring people all out to the desert and I hand them a bunch of microphones and say, okay, let's go find some quiet. And we continue to improve the data that was collected originally at the park. So just because, you know, a place doesn't qualify as a wilderness or an urban or a quiet trail, we just think that there's so much value in bringing this really important resource to people. So I have a picture here too of the group that we had in 2023 after we hiked up a nice big mountain. And these are all just quiet-seeking individuals, much like yourselves. Some of them might actually be on this call. So anyway, that's quiet conservation areas.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. Yeah, I think also just in other words too, the conservation area is really open to any and all types of space. Could be a cultural center too. We've had a few folks reach out about places of worship or like sacred grounds, ceremonial grounds. And there's really just the handshake between an interested party and the resources that Quiet Parks has at our disposal to just get that conversation started with recognizing and giving the resources to groups that want to, maybe they remember the place sounding different. Maybe they remember there's like a different sound or quiet associated with the location. So these are really, they tend to be smaller projects, but they're certainly lofty in the way that they leave the impact on the volunteers and stewards associated. So we really love the conservation projects. Thank you again to those of you who submitted questions in the chat. There's some really good ones here. I did want to point out a few elements too, just on like just a personal note, and as I'd been developing these standards and or criteria rather, and talking with folks that also work with me in the acoustics world and in the other life that I live. There's, like I mentioned before, a lot of research into this soundscape assessment for urban parks and wilderness parks as well. We're really keen to understand how that could fold into assessment criteria when we think about a tiered system and perhaps even awarding certain parks different tier structures where there's like a gold, silver, gold, platinum designation where people who are using the top of the line standards for acoustic assessment or soundscape assessment, if it's the ISO soundscape series, maybe, and sorry if I'm only talking to a few people maybe on this call, like ANSI S12-100, for instance, like finding a home in the analysis of parks. We don't want to alienate people who are doing really, really top-notch scientific work in parks from joining us. In fact, we want to find ways to showcase maybe novel scientific methods for assessment that don't have homes yet in your industrial work or in the work that you're doing with land management. We think Quiet Parks would be a really great place to show off just emerging studies. There's been a few folks. There was a question about National Park Service. We've been fortunate to engage with NPS in the past, just to understand differences between our programs and maybe areas where we can further collaborate. I've been keen to get out to Colorado to discuss with what remains of the team to learn more about what is happening with that program and how we can best support each other's efforts, since we're seeming to get access to some really amazing parts of states, not necessarily federal lands. So we're learning quite a bit about park analysis. We've also been working with a few national parks groups outside of the US, which has been really fruitful and a great way to understand too the differences in what departments that don't have noise groups require from like a distillation of information as it relates to noise and sound. David, you had a number of really good questions here. Let me see if I can scroll back down to the.
I have them listed out here, Ethan. If you want, I can be our question czar.
Sure, maybe let's do like 2 or 3, and then we have a little bit left, and we'll be over time in no time.
That sounds great. Yeah, we are probably going to be over. But thanks everyone for sticking with us. Yeah, so David asks, is the National Park Service engaged and involved? Short answer is yes, and the National Park Service has a robust soundscape team. And I think that we complement each other in a lot of ways. And it's also a federal government agency, whereas we can move without the federal government in ways which can be advantageous, especially now. So it's great. They do a phenomenal job. And we've also, like Ethan said, worked with the Parks Canada department up north of the border and in other countries too. We have a lot of partnerships, both formal and informal, with different organizations, including, Dark Sky International and World Forum for Acoustic Ecology and all sorts of other folks who, again, are on this call in a lot of ways. And in our personal work outside of Quiet Parks International, all of us are really fortunately well connected with all these different groups as well. So we're lucky to have those partnerships. One question was like, who are the members of the jury making decisions about quiet parks? It's not so much of a jury setup as we kind of have sometimes a team of assessors that then provide the data to someone like me, a program director. I review the data and then against the criteria that we've laid out can either say, okay, this will be a wilderness quiet park or won't be a wilderness quiet park. ULF does a very similar thing in urban quiet parks where we get the data, we make sure the data has been collected appropriately and then make a decision based on the analysis of that data. And it's often a very roundtable discussion. If I'm having trouble interpreting some data points or something like that, I can go to someone like Ethan who really knows his stuff and ask his opinion on things. Let's see, next question that I'll answer is about quiet places that are also accessible to disabled or elderly, and quiet places that are safe for women alone or people alone in general. I think that's the power of the Urban Quiet Parks program, really, is that these places are accessible for the most part. They're city parks or places that are accessible by public transportation and therefore are much more kind of quiet and accessible. But Susan, I believe, is who asked that question. If you're interested in wilderness areas that have accessibility for them, definitely shoot me an email and I can do some research and find out some of the wilderness quiet parks that have accessible paths for sure. Kate had a question, or Ethan, how are we doing? Do you want to move on to the last few slides and then folks who want to continue to ask questions can, or
let's do just that.
Okay.
And move on. The next thing that we're going to cover, I'd mentioned at the top, was this glossary, this informative, non-normative section of our assessment criteria to get sort of the idea moving, the ethos sort of established of what Quiet Parks is after. When we talk about these like loftier terms, quiet versus natural quiet, quiet experience, which we make a proper noun throughout the criteria, noise intrusion, and then looking into future terms to define to better establish the dichotomy between sound and noise, something that is an ever-present sort of weighing of the two and why one is worth investigating over the other in some cases. And then soundscape, again, I think that this is showing up to be something that's measurable, that seems to really straddle a good line between that questionnaire versus hard data approach to assessing even the most seemingly like unqualifiable locations, I'll put it that way, and finding a way to quantify them and showcase quiet in a way that doesn't readily appear on a sound level meter. These definitions, I think for the sake of time, I'm just going to show these now. You'll find these at the back of the assessment criteria once that's live tomorrow on our website. And we welcome any and all discussion, as this is sort of our entry foray into the world of quiet education and understanding that quiet experiences, noise, those all mean different things in different parts of the world for different types of listeners. We want to acknowledge oral diversity, that no two listeners on this call or anywhere in the world hear the same, and that quiet can be something that is you can really discuss in a narrative and present to us, and we will approach it with like as much of an open mind as we can when it comes to addressing nominees and potential awardees for the Quiet Parks Award. We're in the Q&A now, and this is where if you've been dying to ask a question just in general, not related to technical, if you're curious about QPI, you can raise your hand and we can dive into that as well. If you have to jump because it's the top of the hour, feel free. We'll have this recorded. You can listen to the Q&A later on because this will be about 61 minutes and 5 seconds into that recording. And I just wanted to touch on Valerie's question in the chat. If I'm understanding well, this is certification question mark. It is voluntary, it is paid. How long would it take this for the certification? Can it be outside of the US? It can be outside of the United States. We had example projects and awardees at the start of the presentation, which were in Taiwan. We've looked into candidate areas in Africa, Europe. We have a number of examples outside of the United States. In fact, I think a majority of our awardees exist outside of the United States. This is not a certification where we are not administering like an official hard and fast certification that would require like ISO compliance with third-party approval that we have certification. We're treating this as an award for now. We do have programs that will eventually work under a certification system, not unlike what you find with other building certifications. So the Quiet Stays program, for instance, is something that we've been looking into in terms of formal certification. But with respect to the other groups that do work in parks as well, we did find that like politically leaning with certification as a term doesn't bode well in the way that we want to work alongside managers and other folks. So the idea of award really resonates not only with how we want to promote this message, but also the way that people want to celebrate their space as well. And so while that does have a fee associated with it to cover the costs of assessment and to bolster the deliverable that we offer those parks, we focus on award as more of like the celebratory aspect of Quiet. And hopefully that answers your question there. Yeah, Matt, any?
No, I was just gonna take a question from Kate, which I thought was a really good one, and there was other interest on, which was, for any category, is there a type of public education or outreach requirement for awardees, or plans to introduce such a requirement? So I think the emphasis being on, or the idea there being like some sort of public outreach or interpretive materials like boards or brochures or things like that that need to be in these parks. In terms of wilderness quiet parks and quiet conservation areas, I'd say that I like to see an intention to develop those materials. And with the caveat being that it is wildly expensive and time consuming to get the kind of educational materials that I would like to see in every park kind of published and on interpretive signs or in brochures and things like that. For instance, in Anza Borrego, they would then need to run each of the words in this brochure up the ring of the entire California system in order to then, have it be publicly available. So it's something that we're working on with them, and it's not a requirement for them to continue to protect the quiet there or have this award. But I think that would be a goal of ours, is to make sure that we can have these interpretive materials available for all of these quiet parks. And we certainly provide them to folks, but the parks themselves might not have the resources or the bandwidth to provide the resources or the interpretive materials.
Can I
Wolf? Yeah.
Can I add one thing? This year's we have on the urban side urban sound walk project that's kind of aimed at raising the awareness of these parks. It's not only in our quite awarded parks, but in general in urban parks. So we're trying to do more that's a general education or awareness around the need for quiet.
Totally. I'll address really quickly a couple questions that David Sykes, you brought up. One of them dealing with, are there any institutions that formally recognize Quiet Parks International and the award or certification process? In the world of acoustics, there are a number of really great candidates where I feel like our findings could take root in and grow with. At this time, this October, I'll actually be concluding my role as on the board of directors for the Institute of Noise Control Engineers, and in which case the conflict of interest with me introducing QPI to that group will be sort of lifted in a way. So I'm hoping to present that to that group and learn how we can work with that like national level group. There's so much great research that was presented at the last INS conference in Vermont this summer about community noise. So we'll hopefully be able to bring that program back with a lot of expertise involved. You had a great question about forest bathing in Japan, or Shinrin-yoku, a multifaceted sort of therapeutic approach where sound is just one element. The sight and the sensation of the forest as well being a huge component. We've looked into this a little bit in recognizing that practice with the Quiet Stays program. But we do have some, or I personally have some contacts in the Tokyo Phonographers Union in Japan, and been hoping to kind of leverage that group as a potential volunteer asset to learn more about cultural practices in that country in particular, and find ways to emphasize the rich connection between culture and sound and listening, specifically in Japan. So that might be the subject of a future webinar when we begin to activate some other volunteers to share more from the cultural perspective of quiet, if participants would be interested to take part in something like that.
We have a good question from Heather about, are you hoping to scale up the pace of assessments / certifications in the future? How many assessments are currently in progress? So many assessments currently in progress. I think I was going to talk a little bit more about this in my wrap-up comments, but the biggest strength that we have as an organization is the number of volunteers that we have who are simultaneously caring about quiet around the world. So I think just in Wilderness Quiet Parks alone, I'm seriously assessing more than 20 places around the world. I'm sure that there are 100 places in total easily that are currently being evaluated, and all of the program directors are volunteers at this time. So this is all extra work that we do on top of our kind of day jobs, so to speak. And it's work that we all really care about and really prioritize and spend a lot of time doing. And there's only so much bandwidth at a time that we can devote. So my hope is, yes, we are hoping to ramp up the pace and the assessments. And it's a slow and steady process sometimes.
Yeah, I think that's a good segue, Matt, if you want to. I'm going to pull up the next slide, which is a reminder for those of you who have stayed on or joining us later to follow this link to volunteer. But while this is up, Matt, if you have any closing remarks?
Yeah, just thank you all for joining and spending the time. We had hundreds of RSVPs and registrations for this event, which is incredible. And like I said, we're all volunteers here, the program directors, the board, and we have been volunteers for the past 6 years, 7 years, or longer for those of us who are working at 1 Square Inch of Silence and working with Gordon Hempton and other folks to kind of start to bring this idea to life. So it's been amazing for me personally just to see the growth of this, and how we have people all over the world who we might not even speak the same language, but we understand when we're in a quiet place experiencing quiet, how important that is to kind of protect and to preserve. Organizationally, we are starting to see an ability to start to fund some projects here and there. We have an urban quiet parks project that's really exciting that we've been able to devote some financial resources towards. We've been able to devote some financial resources towards our kind of technical side of things and our media side of things and our communication side of things, which is really important. So that's all because of volunteers and because of people who donate. And because of the kind of projects we've been able to collaborate with people on. So a big thank you just to everyone for being here, for listening, and would love to connect with each one of you about why quiet is important and what we can do as an organization to kind of help protect quiet in your neck of the woods. All of our contact information is here. You can contact any one of us about kind of larger organizational questions about how we work and things like that. But if you have a more specific question about a program area, these are kind of our individual emails for that. And if you don't hear from, Nick for 2 weeks, it's probably because he's backpacking in some far off trail, or Ethan is in Tokyo building some amazing listening bar, or I'm out in the Amazon jungle. But we really care deeply about the communication with all of you. And I think it's what keeps us excited and jazzed to continue this work. That's all I have.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. We really appreciate it. Don't be a stranger. Please reach out with any and all questions. We are I think I speak safely for the rest of us. We are open books. We want to share as much of the love for quiet with those of you who are interested as possible. So with that, and since we're 10 minutes over, thank you for your patience, and we look forward to staying in touch. Be on the lookout for follow-up with the recording for this event, and also the assessment criteria, which will go live later this week. So with that, take care, and have a quiet rest of your week.